Have you ever wondered how people create courses? Have you ever hoped that you could make a course and it could be effective, it could be engaging, it could be fun? Well, stick around to the end of this talk and you should be able to do that. In fact, I can guarantee you'll be able to do that. So this talk is for Hypnothoughts 2020. My name is James Ledoux, and this is Instructional Design for Hypnotists. What is instructional design? Instructional design is the formal or informal process of systematically designing, creating, planning out course content. So it's the sort of an academic topic. I approach it from more of a real world experience doing it for corporate training clients for the last 20 years. But it's a topic that you can go in very deep from an academic perspective. But this talk will be focused on the things you need to know to create courses and make them more engaging, make them more effective. So there's lots of different instructional design or ID models that you'll hear about. The one that I'm most familiar with and I've used for the last 20 years is ADDIE. And we'll talk about what that is in a second, but it's highlighted in yellow. These other methods like rapid prototyping and others, definitely effective and can be used, and some of you may use them already. The one that's listed on the bottom, Paduma, that's my friend Catherine's creation. It's where she calls it pulling it out of my damn ass. Sometimes as a corporate trainer, you might be asked to create a course on a topic that you know nothing about, and it can be very daunting. But in that case, you know, the methods that we use can be used regardless of the content, regardless of your level of expertise. You can approach it systematically and build a course regardless of what it's about. So what is ADDIE? ADDIE is a method of approaching the topic of instructional design. And this is the way I learned how to do this right out of college, working on corporate IT projects and using this to approach the topic of how to train users to use a new computer system. So the first step is to analyze the situation. And then the next step is design. Then you develop, then you implement or put the training or instructional design into action, and then you ideally want to evaluate it. So this isn't a one-time thing necessarily. Ideally, you would be creating the content, putting it out there, and then evaluating its effectiveness, evaluating how the students perform after they learn it, that sort of thing. So if this wasn't a real, well, it is real, but if we were in the same room together and I were teaching a class for you, I would have exercises. So let's use that along the way and make this a little bit more engaging. So the first exercise I'd like you to do, just take out a piece of paper, or if you don't have a piece of paper, use your smartphone or a Post-it note or whatever you have at hand. And let's jot down a few course ideas. So just write down 10. There's no rules. They don't have to be realistic. They don't even have to be things you definitely are going to do. They could just be things you're interested in or ideas that pop into your head. So let's pause the video for just a second and take a moment to do that. All right. I did this just to play along myself and came up with a few ideas. So these are 10 things that interest me or ideas that popped into my head. We have self-hypnosis, brainstorming, mind mapping. That's something I use all the time in instructional design. We'll talk about that later on in the course. So these are just a few ideas I came up with. Now, once you have your ideas, the next phase you would go into would be the analysis phase. And here you want to answer a few basic questions and sort of start to analyze your audience and see what they're up to, what their characteristics are, start to think about goals that you might have, either new behaviors or new things that you'd like them to learn or do, that sort of thing. So let's do our second exercise. Here, I'm going to zoom this in for just a second so you can see it a little better on the Zoom recording. So pick one of your ideas and let's do a little bit of analysis. So who's the audience? What are their characteristics? Identify the new behaviors or things you'd like them to be able to walk away with after the fact. so on and so forth. So just take a moment to jot down a few ideas. Don't worry about getting all of these down, but just start to think about, who are my students? What are their characteristics? What would they need to learn or change or do after they leave your course? It may be pretty obvious to most of you, but it's just, might even seem silly to be writing this down, but it's just a way to start to build towards your design. In my case, if I were doing brainstorming, the audience I might be looking at is course creators, and their characteristics might be curiosity. Some of them might be feeling, stuck or waiting to take action. And then if I were designing a course for that, I might look at, things they would be able to do after the class. New behaviors would be generating lots of ideas quickly and reserving judgment. Obviously, when you're in a design phase of anything, whether it be a course or a hypnosis session or something in your life, when you're in the generation phase, you just want to create. You don't necessarily want to edit or slow down to try to analyze whether or not it's something that's even reasonable or possible. So that's something we'd like them to do. So that's the type of stuff you would do in this phase. Next up, we have the design phase. Now here in the design phase, we're going to begin to document exactly what you plan to build or how you might build it. We're going to, start to think about the modes of the delivery. So is this going to be an online class? Is it going to be a webinar? Is it going to be a self-paced class that you might do from text only? Is it going to be an audio course, or is it going to be some hybrid of all of those things? What elements are you going to include? So in the design phase, you want to start doing that and coming up with course objectives, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I like to break my courses up into, you have course objectives for the entire course, but then you have individual topics with objectives, and there may be, concrete skills or knowledge or tasks that you want them to walk away with after that topic or after that portion of the course, and you want to jot those down, write those down. And you can do that on pen, paper, and we'll talk about the other modes that you can do. But in the design phase, you're starting to do that. So exercise 3 for the design phase, if I were doing this for my class, I'd ask you to just jot down a few things in this design phase. So what format would you use? Audio, video, text, etc., hybrid. What style of instruction would you use? Is it going to be a lecture style, a talking head? Is it going to be experiential? There's even a new style of learning now called service learning, where let's say you're learning Spanish, and that's fine. You're learning that in a classroom setting. But to reinforce that learning, they would literally take you out and do services in the community where you learn and use your Spanish that you've learned in a real world application, something that's fulfilling, and it's shown to heighten the learning because it's a real world experience, and there's someone you're helping on the other side, and you're getting something out of it. They're getting something out of it. So it's a real win-win. So in this exercise, just take a moment to think about your idea and what methods or modes of instruction will you use. And then the develop phase, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, obviously, in this 1-hour talk. We're not really going to get to that. But in the develop phase, this is where you would build the content. If it was a video lecture series, you would take the outlines or the ideas that you jotted down in your design phase, and you'd literally create those things and, chunk them into small pieces so they're easy to create and then also easy to consume. That'd be a nice tip to think about there. And we'll talk a little bit later about tools that you can use. In this case, I'm using my iMac, the webcam that's in it, a microphone, and PowerPoint. So it can be as simple as that. And the implementation phase, there's some text here, and if anybody's interested in these slides, there'll be some information at the end where you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to send them to you. There's no real secrets in here, but there's definitely some nuggets of wisdom that I put down from my own experience, but also I interviewed 3 subject matter experts that we'll talk about in a little while, and share some of what they learned. I also have 3 supplemental videos that I can make available. Ideally, in a new version of this talk, I'll splice that in, but on this timeline right here, and with my limited editing skills, sorry, Jason, didn't have time to do that yet, but maybe in the next version, we'll definitely do that. So the implementation phase, if this was a corporate learning thing, or in the case of HypnoThoughts Live, the implementation phase would be the actual delivery of the class, whether it be online, recorded and sent in like I'm doing now, or in-person class that's also recorded. You know, there's lots of different options there, but the implementation phase is where you actually go out and teach the content. And then last but not least, the evaluation phase. Again, we don't have an exercise here, but part of instructional design is really going that full life cycle and evaluating the content, its effectiveness, and then ideally enhancing the content with those learnings, improving it. So, you know, things like frequently asked questions can be tracked and added to the materials as supplemental content. You can also do formal certification scenario where you actually ask questions and are gauging proficiency to certify that the person is at the, you know, the required level of proficiency. And these can be subjective. Your evaluation phase, if you were in person teaching, might be, you know, sort of like a live exam or a final exam. When I was in college, we had, you know, tests where you had to sit down and have a conversation with the teacher about whatever topic they brought up, and you'd have to be able to do that, you know, sort of live, and you'd get graded on it on a subjective basis. So that can be part of the evaluation phase. So next topic, I mentioned it earlier, but something that's really done a lot from a core, you know, from a formal instructional design thing would be to write course objectives. And ideally, when we're thinking about this, we want these objectives to be using action verbs that I'll go over. Benjamin Bloom came up with a taxonomy, or a list of words and levels of knowledge that you can use when you're creating these course objectives. So I wouldn't worry about trying to memorize them here or even pick them up. But if it's something that interests you, I would highly recommend writing down your objectives, and whether these are things that you formally state to your students or are just implicit in how you're approaching the topic. It's good to have clear, measurable objectives so you know that what you're tracking towards, and then you can write test questions or evaluation methods to measure whether or not you actually achieve those goals. So we can use the Bloom taxonomy words and lists of words, and I'll show you a few examples here to write those course objectives. So here's a picture of the Bloom's taxonomy, and I'll zoom in since on the Zoom it's maybe not very clear. But in the first phase, you're looking at knowledge, and you're using things like list and you know, real action verbs. And then in the next phase, the comprehension phase, you know, there's a different type of word being used here. So you're comparing, describing, you know, that sort of thing. And then you go on up the chain until you finally get to from synthesis to evaluation. So, and this is Bloom's taxonomy with regard to, you see in the highlight there, the yellow, it's critical thinking. So these would be a very formal way of beginning to think about and write course objectives that can be measured. You know, so in this case, if I were doing brainstorming, one of my first bullets might be, you know, an objective of the course would be, upon completion of this course, you'll be able to list brainstorming techniques, you know, or define brainstorming, or, you know, explain the process of XYZ. So those are the types of things that Bloom came up with this taxonomy. And there are some criticisms of it, but I find it very useful because there are some things you want to avoid, and we'll talk about those in a second. So you want to avoid things that are vague or hard to measure. So things like believe or hear or realize or capacity or intelligence. Now, some of you are thinking, but wait a second, these are great words. And yes, they are good words. Realize is a phrase we use in hypnosis all the time. As you begin to notice the sound of my voice, you may realize that I sound a bit like Kermit the Frog, those sorts of things. But when you're writing objectives, you want to use more hard action words that are easier to measure. Intelligence is not an easy thing to measure, although, yes, you can write a course and do an IQ test and measure it. But from a course objectives point, it's hard to hit that one. The other things you might want to avoid are phrases. So phrases to avoid, appreciation for, just awareness of or understanding of, those sorts of vague phrases. They're fine to use. You've probably heard me say some of them as we're talking or as I'm talking. However, from a formal instructional design perspective, you really want those objectives to be clear and measurable so that you can take them through that entire ADDIE process. So here are some action verbs. The first set of words were critical thinking. These are more action oriented. And so again, if you're interested in this list, you can ask me for the PowerPoint at the end. There'll be an email address you can send me a note to. I'd be happy to share this with you. Also, if you just Google Bloom's taxonomy, you'll find these types of lists. And as you're brainstorming your course objectives, you can just kind of have this up on the side or print out a piece of copy and then kind of pick and choose little words to use. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but wait, I've never written a course objective. That's fine. Don't feel bad about that. It's not a problem. If you've created a course, you had one in your mind that maybe you didn't state formally, and that's fine. But you definitely want to have these course objectives so you know where you're headed, and then you can measure whether or not you got there. So let's write some course objectives. So just taking that idea that you had earlier, let's write 3 to 4 course objectives and using some action words. So, things like explain or define or list, that type of action word, or demonstrate, things like that, things that you can measure. So let's take a moment now, do exercise number 4, and write down a few course objectives. And you can see it on the screen here, but when I like to write course objectives, I literally just write, upon completion of this course or this module or this topic, you will be able to. And I may not state that formally in a class, but I start that way, or after this lesson, you can blah, blah, blah. And then just write down your action verbs and the phrases. And these will kind of go back towards the things you were thinking about when you were designing this. And these would be things that at the end of this topic, at the end of this course, you want to be able to say, yes, I can do those things. Learning theories. You could spend a whole hour talking just about learning theories, talking about adult learning theory, which has sort of been the focus of my career, helping adults learn in the corporate setting. But you could also spend time talking about child learning theory, and you could compare and contrast the two. But when I think about adult learning theory, really adults want to know why they're learning something or what's in it for them. Why is it important? They're driven by internal motivations, and they use their prior experience to sort of evaluate and build connections to the new content that they're learning. The other major sort of learning theory that you might experience if you're doing instructional design would be the experiential, and that'd be taking a person through a series of processes to have an experience and then learn from that experience and then relate that experience to other experiences. So I would say easiest way to incorporate that into your classes is just try to avoid the Ferris Bueller monotone lecture, which I may or may not be doing. but you want to have engaging content. You want to have exercises. You want to have interactions. Consider using, questions or empowering questions to stimulate conversation. And if you're in a live classroom, don't be afraid to use silence to sort of prompt interactions. So sometimes people will pause for just a moment, and when they don't hear a response to their answer, they'll just give an answer to the question that they asked. So when they don't hear a response, they'll just immediately keep going on and on. And really, as a trainer, you want to think about being silent and using those pauses, and eventually someone will jump in and fill that void. And there's obviously hypnotic techniques that you can use to encourage people to be more engaged and that sort of thing. And coming to one now, we're going to talk about the VAK, or the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning styles. This is something that we know about from NLP, and you may talk about it in terms of submodalities or modalities, but any effective and engaging course is going to use elements of the VAK, and as many as they can, to appeal to all different types of learners. Now, there isn't probably someone that's just one or the other. I would say people are on a spectrum with these. Even people that are blind have visual, have the ability to visualize in space or feeling or time. So I would say the elements of these are really critical to your courses. So in this case, you're watching a video of me in a talking head. You're seeing me wave my hands around. There's a little bit of animation there. You're seeing the slides on the screen, so that's visual. You're also hearing my voice. And then kinesthetic, we're doing a few exercises. If you're playing along, you're doing a few exercises. So we're kind of incorporating all three of those. In a live classroom, it's obviously the easiest setting to take advantage of these, because you can use your whole body language. You can use the space, the tonality. For the auditory and the visual, you can draw pictures on the board, or in the case of, if you're very organized, you could have online content with animations, those sorts of things. Exercise number 5. Let's take a moment to sort of write down a few things you can do from a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic perspective to use in your course. Like, what elements could you use from a visual perspective? What type of audio or auditory techniques would you use? And what kind of kinesthetics would you use? Perhaps some exercises or things like that. Now, here for this example that I did, what visuals would I use? In this video, I'm using a talking head video. I'm using screen share. I'm using a slideshow. And if I were doing, a formal course on brainstorming, I would include some animations of things like mind maps or whiteboard sessions, or, something along those lines. Maybe do something exciting with time lapse. You could have a lot of different things that you could do. Auditory, some ideas you might have would be text to speech. So even if it's written content, you can use tools to take that text and turn it into, a voice that sounds like Siri or Alexa. You could use narration. So that would be interesting. From a visual perspective, I didn't mention it above, but you could use captioning or text on the screen that coincides with the video, with the audio. So that's something that you can do. And then, from a kinesthetic, you might use lo-fi options with your hands involved. So me personally, I definitely an auditory learner. Visually, I like to do visual thinking, but the thing that cements it is when I do all three. So if I see something, hear it, and then write it down, using all three modes makes me 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more likely to remember it. I mean, it's substantially better for me personally to get all 3 methods. And sometimes I write down notes and don't ever read them again, but just the act of physically writing them kind of transcribes them for me into my mind. All right, so we've talked a lot about theory, but let's talk about some more fun ways of working. How do you do instructional design, and how can you use that in your world to build courses without necessarily having to do the formal stuff that I was talking about earlier. Maybe those Bloom's taxonomy lists don't appeal to you at all. There's things you can do with the tools you already have to start creating your courses, and it's not as hard as you might imagine. So you can create a course outline. This could be on paper. You can, use pen and paper, or you can type it up, or you can use apps like outlining apps. One of my most favorite methods would be mind maps, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This is also a very popular method that came up with several of the people that I interviewed. You could create a storyboard. So a storyboard would be something like you've seen in a comic book strip, where you might plan out instructional videos or content and draw little stick figures to describe the action that's happening. The mind map, that's a visual way of nonlinear thinking. So you're basically starting in the middle of the page, writing ideas, and then drawing lines and connecting them. So those are definitely some ideas there for you. Other things I like to do besides mind mapping, other types of visual thinking, things like storyboarding, which we talked about. I guess that falls into the category of visual thinking, but you can draw pictures of concepts that you want to convey. I would say you could use just an intuitive method, which is just start and begin creating. And as you create the content, other ideas will occur to you, and then do them in a modular fashion. So don't try to shoot a 5-hour video, but maybe shoot a 10-minute video, and then another 10-minute video, and then a 20-minute video. And then you might look at those little pieces like little pieces of Lego, and then sort of rearrange them. Another technique I love to use when you're approaching a new topic, it happens naturally because you don't know anything about the topic. But even for things that I know about, when I'm creating a course, I like to use the beginner's mind technique and really try to think from the childlike perspective of, what do I need to know to master this topic? What do I know already? What don't I know? What things I could need to learn? Using the beginner's mind would be one way to do that. And if you're not, if that's not ringing a bell, just think about describing to someone who has no idea how to do something, all the steps they would do to do that thing. So something like boiling water, or making spaghetti. So what would you have to tell someone who had no idea how to make spaghetti, how to do it? Well, there's a lot involved in it. It's probably like 150 steps just to boil water and make spaghetti. But they'd have to get out a pot. They'd have to be able to fill it with water, place it on the stove, turn on the stove, set the right temperature, watch the water until it begins to bubble and boil. Carefully, open the package of the spaghetti, slide it in, perhaps add some salt or other things that they might do at that stage. And, so even the simple thing like making spaghetti really has lots and lots of tasks. Now, you may not teach every one of those tasks, but when you approach a topic that you're thinking about teaching, approaching it from that beginner's mind perspective will open up new avenues of thoughts or new ideas that can help you, with that. And then from an NLP perspective, or just a real world perspective, modeling can be a huge benefit when you're trying to do course correction, either finding an expert and modeling how they approach the topic, or finding a course or a book or content about that subject and sort of modeling what works for them and incorporating that into your teaching method. That's definitely a huge thing that you can do. And then last but not least, subject matter expert interviews, or SME, we say in the business, but why would you say that? But subject matter experts, if you're teaching a topic that you're an expert in, it still may be beneficial to get perspectives from other experts, interview them about the topic, find out their perspectives, and ask them questions about how they would teach someone this topic. What sorts of examples would they use, or how have they done it in the past? What's been successful for them? Asking that subject matter expert those questions can really be illuminating, can really shorten your learning curve and improve the quality of your class. So this is a sample of a course outline. I typically am working with a host of people when I'm making a course. So I am going to have subject matter experts that have been identified. So on my current project, I'm writing courses on finance and accounting. So I have finance experts that can tell me, you know, what accounts are being used for what types of financial activities and you know, all these different things that I need to know about. But when I'm approaching a topic, I'm going to want to come up with a name for the course or that topic that I'm writing about. You want to think about the time or the duration of the course, talk about the audience. You just jot these things down, and these can start off on paper, but typically in my setting, I'm doing them electronically and then getting approvals and that sort of thing. But you really want to use an outline to plan out your course. And here's an example of, you know, one that I did sort of thinking about this course itself. You know, so instructional design for hypnotists. If this was a live class, I'd probably make it 8 hours. The audience would be hypnotists who want to learn about instructional design. And then here might be some objectives that are using Bloom's taxonomy. Zoomed in a little too much. Upon completion of this course, you'll be able to describe instructional design. You'll be able to define Bloom's taxonomy, you know, be able to write course objectives and so on. So these would be things that you're sort of building out as your goals, and then you want to go build content to teach that topic and make it effective. And these can be lo-fi or hi-fi, and these are going to develop over time as you create them. But typically in my world, you know, you could spend a lot of time building a topic, but first you want to start with an outline that people look at, give you feedback on, and then agree upon, so that you're not wasting a lot of time. That definitely can be something you want to avoid. We talked earlier about mind maps, or I mentioned them briefly, and we're going to talk about them a lot or more when I talk about the subject matter experts that I interviewed from a course creator perspective. But mind maps are one of my favorite things to do when I'm trying to brainstorm ideas. So typically you start in the middle of the page. You might write down the main thing, like in this case, instructional design. And then as ideas occur to you, you write them down. So when I was doing this, Bloom's taxonomy popped into mind, I write it down. And then, you know, action verbs, you know, things to avoid popped into my head, or learning theories, learning styles, and you just start building a little map of all these topics and drawing lines between the ones that are connected. And you can get very creative with this. There's lots of content on YouTube about mind maps, so I'd encourage you to do that. There's also some really great apps for this, both on the smartphone or smart tablets, or your dumb tablets, or whatever tablets you have, or on the PC or the Mac or the Linux or whatever you got. But, you know, just I'll share a little story about mind maps. When I was looking to, you know, invest my money and get a good return, and also kind of plan out how I was approaching my finances, I did a mind map back in, you know, the mid 90s that to this day still influences how I approach the topic and what's happened in my life. So, you know, I wrote down, I would have 3 pillars, and I would have, you know, these ideas of like investing and consulting and, you know, ownership of things, you know, and you can really do a lot with mind maps. They don't just have to be about instructional design. They can be used for literally anything that you want to brainstorm about. So let's do a little example mind map. So why don't you take down the course idea that you came up with earlier, write that in the middle of the page, and then just take 3 to 5 minutes and write down all the thoughts as they occur to you and draw little connections. Some people like to draw pictures in their mind maps. So instead of writing the word, you know, instead of writing money, they might draw a symbol for money. Or instead of writing the word car, they might just draw a little picture of a car. There's no real rules to it. Well, I guess there are some rules, but there's no real strict guidelines for it. Whatever works for you, drawing pictures, writing down the words, doing both You can do it in pen or pencil or colored markers or some combination there, and colored pencils. All of that's helpful. And just take a moment now, write down your course idea, and then just write down the things that occur to you as you think about it. And those things very likely could become objectives or topics or subtopics or exercises or parts of your course. So the mind map can really just, and it opens up a different part of your mind than the, sort of linear thinking, right-brained. This is more of a creative left brain activity, or if it's the other way around, that's fine. But that's definitely something you want to take a moment to do. All right, presuming you've done your mind map, I hope you found that to be helpful, but set that aside. You're definitely going to use that in the future, but just if you take nothing away from this course, remember that mind maps can be used to plan out almost anything, whether it be an article, a blog post, a video, a course. They're really, really fun and effective way to approach the topic. All right. Next, I want to talk a little bit about state control. So state control is important for you as a hypnotist, obviously, when you're working with your clients. And as a trainer, it's very important. So you want to be, calm, in command, using your hypnotic skills, sort of modeling in yourself the state that you'd like to project, and then, using the techniques that you've learned in all the other classes, like David Snyder's class, and he talks about smurfing and all of those various things. But if nothing else, just being aware of your own state and then calibrating to your students and watching their state. So state control is not only about your state, but also your student's state. And if you're doing an online class, you want to be trying to imagine the state of the people watching your class or taking your class, and so you can try to, be effective that way. So it's definitely something that you probably know more about than I do, but it's something to think about when you're doing your courses. And then this is a course for hypnotists, but I haven't spent much time talking about hypnotic techniques. That'll be for all your other courses, but I'll use a phrase that I learned from Anthony Jacquin in his book, Reality is Plastic. But when you're designing your course and when you're delivering your course, you want to be the hypnotist. So I've talked about instructional design and how to plan out and approach the topic, but you're a hypnotist. So be the hypnotist. Use all of your hypnotic techniques and tools as you build and deliver your course to make it more effective. So we're talking about things like using hypnotic language patterns, leading and pacing, state control, which we talked about a moment ago. If you're in person, pattern interrupts can be very effective. I don't know how effective they are on a video course unless you have some animation fly across the screen or you just say something really non sequitur. You can use yes sets or no sets, with questions and phrasing. Obviously, the hypnotic language patterns, you can embed commands using that language structure patterns. You can use things like because. So Bloom's taxonomy is very helpful for your courses because students like clear objectives that they know they can be measured against, or whatever it is that you want to do. So be the hypnotist, use those things. There's lots and lots of references and courses I could point you to. Mike Mandel, who's my first hypnosis mentor, would be a great place to start. If you're looking for storytelling, James Hazelrig would be great, as well as the 3 people that I interviewed for this course. We have Chris Thompson, Jason Linett, and Lori Hammond, all great examples of using hypnotic techniques in their work, and perfect. If you're looking for courses or course creators to emulate, those would be 3 that I might start with. And then empowering questions. This is a technique that I learned from Chris Thompson and Mike Mandel, but asking your students questions in a way that empowers them to find solutions to the questions or find answers. So asking things like, how might instructional design improve your course creation? Or how can you use the information that you learned here today to write more effective course objectives and use that when you make your next course, things like that. Just empowering questions are a great way to sort of engage with your students. And if you're interested in those, check out the Brain Software podcast. Mike and Chris typically have an empowering question in each episode. All right, course creation tools. So we've talked a lot about theory. We've done a few little basic exercises, and I'll just touch on a topic of course creation tools. So in a moment, we have another exercise about this, but course creation tools that I typically use, Microsoft Office. If you're looking at audio, I would recommend looking at Audacity. It's a free editing tool that you can use to record narrations and put those in e-learnings or in your courses, or you can make an audio program, whatever you're doing. If you are in the Apple ecosystem, then you can use GarageBand or your iPhone/Android, plus all the different apps that may come with that. Those would be great for course creators. Some of the courses you've probably paid for were made with just those simple tools. For video, obviously you can use your smartphone or your computer. I'm using a webcam on an iMac right now. You can use Microsoft Teams to record a meeting. You could also do Zoom, which I'm doing right now. If you're looking at editing tools, I'm not an expert at either of these, but I've had a little bit of interaction with ScreenFlow, and I've used Camtasia to do screen recordings, which that can be helpful. From an instructional design perspective, we sometimes use higher end tools for e-learning creation or online learning. So things like Adobe Captivate, Articulate Studio, Articulate Rise. And then for hosting, just a few of the things that came up as I talked to the course creators that I'll mention here in a moment. Kajabi is a hosting app for online courses. It's excellent, sort of the Cadillac of those things. Several of the creators use WordPress or for their works. There's also Podia, which is a little bit sort of more, I would say, lower level than Kajabi, but definitely still a good platform. And then you have Vimeo and YouTube. People are using those to host content. So exercise number 7, this will be the final exercise, I believe. And what I'd like you to do is just think of for a moment, if you had to create a course today, what resources and tools do you already own or have access to that you could use to create that course? So I jotted down a few here. In my case, for me, if I were making a course today, which I am, I have my smartphone, I have my iMac with the webcam, I have this Rode podcasting mic with a stand, and these other tools that I jotted down here, paper, pencils, pens. I have Microsoft Office. These slides were done in PowerPoint. You could easily use a free tool like Google to make a PowerPoint or a slideshow. You could even have a Word document and just scroll through it. There's all kinds of things you can do. So just take a moment to take a little mental inventory, jot it down on paper, all the things you already have that you could use to create a course. The reason I put this in here is one of the things you can do with anything is, set the goal out there in the future and say, oh, if only I had that new $3,000 camera or that Red Cinema 4K camera, then I could make the greatest course in the world. Or if only I had, $300 lavalier mic, then everything would be perfect. And some of those things may help your course creation, but I would hazard a guess that if you're watching this video, if you're attending HypnoThoughts Live, either in person or via video, you already have at your fingertips everything you need to create a basic course. Now, there may be things you have to go out and learn about, like where you're going to host it, or picking a service like WordPress or Kajabi or Podia or something like that. But to create the actual course content, you pretty much probably have everything you need already. And if you don't, you can make a list of things to kind of borrow from friends or check out from a library, or do some sort of barter with a friend to trade time on their computer or something along those lines. It's really an exercise in just creativity and finding a way to make it happen. All right, so one of the last things we'll talk about, subject matter experts. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, this is a great way to gather content, to get ideas, and to really improve the quality of your content. Now, I have 3 30-minute to 45-minute interviews with several excellent hypnotists that I'm going to make available to you. So if you're interested in that, I'll be posting them in the MMHA or Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. I'll also be sharing them in the ICBCH Train the Trainer program and making them available to anybody who emails me. We may even be able to make them available through HypnoThoughts Live. I'm not sure about that, but I'll find a way to put them on Dropbox or Vimeo or YouTube and make them available to you. So if you're interested in that, please email me and say something like, give me the loot, or SME interviews, or something along those lines. So the 3 people I talked to, and in an ideal world, I would cut this video and splice these in. And if I can learn how to do that in the next few days, the next version of this video will have that. But in preparation for this talk, I spoke with Jason Linett, founder of Virginia Hypnosis and the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast and the Work Smart Hypnosis best-selling book on Amazon. I also spoke with Chris Thompson, co-founder of Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy and the author of Talking to Toddlers. So Chris was generous with his time, as well as Jason. And then last but not least, I spoke with Lori Hammond. Lori is a course creator. She has, all 3 of these people are hypnotists and successful course creators, which is why I spoke with them. But she has 2 courses that I've personally taken, which is Make Great Video, which is a sort of a mini course on Facebook that's really awesome if you're hesitant about talking in video or on camera. And then Weight Loss Without Willpower. So I've bought and or attended courses with all 3 of these people that I interviewed. So let's first talk a little bit about Jason. As I mentioned before, Jason Linett is founder of Virginia Hypnosis, Work Smart Hypnosis, best-selling author, podcaster, course creator. And we talked a lot about his approach to course creation. And, the questions are going to be in the video that you can see, but a couple key takeaways that I jotted down from them. How does Jason approach his course creation? Well, Jason pulled out an artist portfolio that he used when he was writing his book. And then he also flashed an image of a storyboard that he used. So he likes to use Post-it notes that you can write ideas on and move them around, which is a great way to do nonlinear course creation. And then he likes to put them on a Post-it board that he can put in that artist portfolio and carry around with him. Also, I love that idea. And I would just say that, be sure to periodically take pictures if you're using Post-it notes, because sometimes the tape loses its sticky and they can fall off. So that's definitely something to just be aware of if you're using that. Jason also loves using mind maps, and he called it his serial killer strategy, where you post things up and draw connections and, use the beautiful mind type of approach. Already mentioned the artist portfolio. Let's see. Also, we talked a little bit about tools that he uses. So, I've seen videos that Jason's created for instructional content. He's done it on cell phones. He currently does a lot of videos from his webcam within his office at Virginia Hypnosis. He has a ring lighting system that he can flip up and down when he's going into sort of studio mode. So that's pretty helpful. And then he uses a WordPress theme that's customized for membership or for his instructional content and membership. And I already mentioned the ring light. So those are some of the things Jason's using. And then we talked a little bit about hypnotic techniques and how he uses those in his materials. Something you'll notice when you watch that video and as you think about other content you've seen from Jason is that he is constantly effortlessly weaving in hypnotic language patterns into his work. And as you think about that topic, you almost can hear Jason's voice as he goes through that. He uses leading and pacing, obviously. He uses stories, lots of stories, metaphors and references. And then definitely one of the key differentiators for the 3 creators that I spoke with is outsourcing. So I personally haven't really used outsourcing for course creation. I'm typically the outsourced resource that goes into a corporation to do the course creation. However, he's using outsourcing to do transcripts, graphics, editing, and administrative work. So definitely learned a lot from Jason, and you'll enjoy that video when you see it. Chris Thompson, as I mentioned, was co-founder of Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy and creator of multiple successful courses. He is sort of the technical wizard behind the wizard, if you will, at the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. So Chris mentioned he just, has a tenacity about his work, and if there's something he doesn't know how to do, he just figures out that he'll figure it out. So we talked about the online. Oh, when I asked Chris how he and Mike approach course creation, they use an online tool for mind mapping. I can't remember the name of the tool, but I'll get it and write it down for a list of resources that may pertain to this talk. But then when they're doing the actual videos, because they do a lot of video content, so they'll create some very simplistic, shoddy, if you will, just text-based slides, and then they use those with a teleprompter that incorporates an iPad. So they use that for their course creation. And then obviously they use a camcorder. I've seen content from them on phones, obviously, and then Final Cut Pro is how he edits. And then they are big proponents of Kajabi. Chris and Mike were early adopters of Kajabi. And one thing that's nice about that platform, not only is it house all of your learning content and email and interactions with your so sort of like a customer relationship management tool as well, but Kajabi has made a mobile app. So if you own any of the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy courses, you may have already known this, but you can log into the Kajabi app and then see the content on your phone through their app. It's really awesome. And then Chris and Mike also use WordPress. They use Thrive themes for landing pages and things like that. So they're big proponents of WordPress and the Thrive themes. And they like high quality audio, so they use lavalier mics and LED light panels to improve the quality. And I believe they use a green screen as well. So that's definitely things that they can use. And then if we look at, hypnotic techniques that Chris and Mike use in their courses, I would say, power words. They use state control. They use lots of stories, hypnotic language patterns, NLP language patterns, empowering questions, which we talked about earlier. And then I mentioned outsourcing. They're big proponents of it. It's a force multiplier for their work, and that allows Mike and Chris to create a lot more content by using outsourcing for graphics and editing and things like that. And they also recently hired a community manager. And that's one key takeaway from Chris, which was think about not only building a course, but then building a community around that course. And he mentioned that they use Facebook groups, as well as I've seen Facebook groups used by many other hypnotists. Both Jason Linett and Lori Hammond have used Facebook extensively with their groups. So it's a great way to have interaction. And that's one thing that you need to think about with these online courses is ways for your audience to interact with you and interact with the content and get feedback from you, and then share feedback from about the content, so you can sort of keep that continuous improvement going, or looking at new files and new folders and that sort of thing. Last but not least, I spoke with Lori. Lori Hammond is a hypnotist. She used hypnosis successfully in her life to make lots of improvements, and then began to think about using that for others. So she really brings a great experience to her work, and has an authenticity to her work in her speaking that's really engaging and really empowering, helpful. So if we were to talk about the types of things that Lori's using, In her talks, oh, yeah, sorry, I'm just spacing out here. She uses Post-it notes on a wall to sort of plan out her content, and then she makes slides that have like a hook, a key point that she wants to make, and then maybe a question. So she uses lots of questions to sort of, or stories to pull her audience into her content. So that's definitely something that we'll talk about on the next slide. The tools we talked about, she uses a webcam. She also uses a ring light, smartphone, Kajabi, and you know, high quality microphones. She had a mic that she was using handheld when we talked, but normally it's mounted similar to the one I'm using. And then in terms of the hypnotic techniques, we talked a lot about state control. So she likes to get herself into the state that she's wanting her students to be in and really light herself up with some of the techniques, like peak performance techniques and other techniques. She really is a huge fan of rapport, and I've experienced this in her work. She asks questions that really draw you in and shares personal stories that are authentic and really make you know, like, and trust her. So that's a real successful technique for her. There's also elements of visualization and storytelling and that sort of thing. We also talked about her using vocal tonality that she modeled after an audiobook that she really liked, and then has found that to be very effective for her public speaking, her presentations, and her videos. So some really great stories that they shared in these interviews. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll be happy to share those things with you. So last but not least, say hello. If you have questions, comments, or get stuck with instructional design, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Facebook as @JamesLedoux, Ledoux, Instagram @JamesLedoux, and my email is james@ledouxllc.com, and my phone number is here as well, 512-750-6165. No prank calls, please. And now I realize I'm talking to hypnotists, and I told you to prank call me. But really, feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, suggestions, and if you would like to see those other 3 videos, I'd be happy to share those with you. So thanks for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of Hypnothoughts.